Hello everyone. Today I am answering another Ask a Witch question that it's actually taken me, again, a really long time to get around to answering this. I know that I go a long time between our videos right now. We're primarily focused on getting the content up on the seminary, where we now have 3 different course series that are live, 2 of which are done, and we're launching 2 more this summer. So a lot of my YouTube content has just fallen by the wayside for the entire channel, not just for me, but from Sanctum's other creators. So I apologize. We're working on fitting that back in. Before I get started, I want to remind everyone that Ask a Witch is specifically geared towards any of Sanctum staff and volunteers answering a question from their perspective, what they think, what they feel, what they believe, rather than like our more historical content. This is really our opinions and how we would tackle things. This one's going to turn into a little bit of a rant, like my last one, which was on why I don't do weight loss spells. So I apologize that these have been a little ranty lately. It seems like there's a lot to rant about. The question that I was sent, I'm going to summarize rather than quoting exactly, which normally I quote exactly, but it was in the course of a longer conversation and there were some private details shared about what this person has been going through. So I'm going to sum up, but it basically boiled down to, why does it feel as though when I'm seeking out pagan, occult, esoteric, spiritual community, so much of it is not welcoming to me as a BIPOC person? Why does it seem as though there's a lot of white supremacy prevalent in that community? Am I the only one who's noticing this, or have other students and other people who've come to you for clergy counseling also complained about this? And I want to say, absolutely, you're not the only person noticing this. That this is a hugely prevalent problem in occult, esoteric, spiritual, and witchcraft-centered spaces. That it's one that Yun and I encountered a lot when we ran a witchcraft store and a community center. That it's one that we've had multiple people who come to us for clergy counsel complain about. So no, you are not alone in what you've encountered. And then sort of the addendum to that question is, why is it so prevalent? So first, I want to say that I'm going to give some evidence of how prevalent it is later on in the video, because I know that I'm going to get people who say, your lived experience is invalid because I have not personally seen and been affected by this in a negative and harmful fashion. It doesn't exist, and all the people who've told you that it exists are lying and exaggerating and just don't know how to take jokes, and you're lying and exaggerating and just don't know how to take jokes. And really, if you don't like it, you should just go make your own safe spaces that we can then invade and take over and demand to be prioritized within. So I'm just going to give some evidence as we go on, but I want to start with saying that white supremacy is on the rise. No, let me correct. Overt white supremacy is on the rise. It's always been there. It's always been affecting various communities. It has never been safe in the United States to be Black, First Nations, Indigenous, Native American, Latin, Jewish, Brahmani. It's never been safe, okay? it is just really overt and out there right now. They're saying the quiet part out loud. They're not hiding it. It's really visible, but that doesn't mean that it's newly prevalent. If anything, if you actually look at what people will cop to statistically, the larger majority of Americans seem to be improving on a lot of issues, but this very vocal and very violent minority is just seizing control by any means necessary and kind of just railroading everyone else. But I digress. The occult and esoteric community doesn't exist in a vacuum. You know, whether you're talking about Wicca, paganism, you know, some branch of witchcraft, some branch of neo-pagan reconstructionism, some branch of ceremonial magic, whatever you're looking at, even if it seems like an insular, exclusionary, isolated community, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. The people who come into that community, who build it, who contribute to it, they came from the culture that is already a white supremacist culture. We live in white nationalism. We live in the rising tide of fascism rooted in white nationalism. And you don't exist in these occult, esoteric, spiritual, or witchcraft related communities like in La La Land far away from that. The people who are moving in that community, they're still being impacted by the media, by the press, by social media, by the other overlapping communities that they exist within, whether that's family, whether that's friends. And if those spaces are pushing white supremacist ideology onto them, whether they realize it or not, that will then influence other spaces that they exist within, unless they work really, really, really hard to keep it out. Then additionally, the radicalized white supremacists are intentionally coming into communities and trying to move them more white supremacist. And before anyone's like, nah, they don't do that. Yes, they do. They instruct each other on how to do this in communities on Reddit, in communities and other social media spaces. They will literally give each other instructions on how to infiltrate and then take over communities, whether that's a bar that you'd like to hang out in, whether that's a protest group that they want to derail and make unsuccessful. There's a whole playbook that you can literally download that they have for how to ruin safe spaces for others. So even if you manage to find a space and isolate it from this white supremacy with very purposeful, very intentional ideas towards building a safe space for BIPOC people, the white supremacists will try to intentionally come there and destroy it. And if they can't do it through infiltration, they'll try and do it by any other means, whether that's intimidation, whether that's violence, whether that's getting the law involved, whether that's shutting down spaces where you operate. The more that we ignore that they use those tactics, the more successful those tactics are. So one, the people who are building these communities, even if they have the best of intentions, are still influenced by the white supremacist culture that we all operate within. I'm influenced by it. Even when I try really hard not to be racist, I'm sure there are times that I am. And I have to be willing to acknowledge that and fight to be anti-racist myself, even when the person I'm calling out for the racism is me. So, two, the white supremacists don't want us to be successful in building safe spaces. The Christian alt-right white supremacist movement does not want occultism, witchcraft, esotericism, any of that to be successful. So they're going to aggressively try and derail attempts to have safe spaces against white supremacy and against the Christian supremacy. So there's all of that. Additionally, there have always been specifically white supremacist occult and esoteric movements, and they have had huge influences on the broader occult, esoteric, and witchcraft communities and pagan communities. Okay, so this is where I said that I talk about proof. I could do a whole long rant about Hitler, white supremacy, and his obsession with the occult. I'm going to just sum up that that had a huge influence on the resurgence of interest in certain branches of neo-paganism and certain brands of neo-pagan reconstructionism, and that I would love to do a longer and more in-depth video on that. And if you all are interested, let me know and I will. But I will say that we like to ignore the fact that there are occult movements that were heavily influenced by the Nazi obsession with the occult. But additionally, even just ceremonial magic at its root was often heavily anti-Semitic. So even as they were drawing on misappropriated, badly misunderstood Jewish mysticism and Arabic concepts for their ceremonial magic, these were white supremacist people. Let's talk about what's going on in the modern movements. And I want to clarify something before I get into this. Even though I'm going to be talking about specific branches of paganism, occultism, esotericism, witchcraft, etc., the New Age movement, that does not reflect on everyone who belongs to those movements. So for example, my first one that I want to get into is modern Norse paganism. That does not mean that all Norse paganists are white supremacists. In fact, a lot of them are fighting very, very, very hard to get the white supremacists out of their communities. They are trying. There are Norse paganists who are pro-LGBTQIA, who are pro-BIPOC, who are anti-racist, and who are fighting to make safe spaces that are not rooted in white supremacy. Unfortunately, some of the people representing Norse paganism to the greater world, to the outer world, are doing it in a very white supremacist way. And there are certain symbols, I see people going, that's not a Nazi symbol, that's a Norse paganism symbol, and then it'll be like a Nazi symbol that was never part of Norse paganism. So kind of a mess finding accurate information on social media, and there's a lot of loud misinformation. So some modern examples from Norse neo-paganism is at the 2017 Unite the Right protests in Charlottesville, many of the alt-right protesters carried flags depicting Thor's hammer. Or we can talk about how some of the terrorists, like the person behind the 2019 New Zealand terror attack, have in their manifesto references to Norse paganism. Or we can talk about the alt-right pagan group, the Wolves of Vinland in Lynchburg, Virginia, which is an overtly white supremacist Norse pagan group. One of their members set fire to a historic black church, and they've all started wearing shirts with slogans demanding that that person be freed. During the insurrection at the Capitol, the attempted overthrowing of the government in Washington, D.C., the QAnon shaman is covered in tattoos of Norse mythology. So that's just a few examples, and I could belabor this point, but I'm not gonna. Let's move into the Satanic Temple. They've been making a name for themselves right now, right? They are going to save abortion access. Boy, they get a lot of donations given to them because they're gonna save us from the Christian alt-right by saving abortion access, right? That's the claim. Yeah, Lucian Greaves, also known as Doug Missico, neither of which is his actual legal name, is a terrible person. And I say this knowing that he may come after me, because he comes after anyone who talks about him openly. But like the audio and transcripts of him being a terrible person are available online. This is my personal opinion, as I said at the beginning of the video, and does not represent Sanctum of the Craft as a whole, as a legal entity. I am representing myself as a member of the clergy when I say that I find his statements morally reprehensible. Whether you're talking about him making horrible comments about physically differently abled and mentally differently abled people, whether you're talking about how he complained that the Nazis ruined the word anti-Semitism for everyone and that it should be okay, and that he wants to go back to it being okay to hate Jews. Let's see. I can keep going for morally reprehensible examples of this, including the slurs that he uses against so many groups. But he has explicitly stated that he supports eugenics and believes that he should be considered a qualified individual to decide who should and should not be permitted to have children. And he has explicitly stated his support for Italian fascists, as well as neo-Nazi groups on multiple occasions. So when I talk about all the examples I can give you on how this co-founder of the Satanic Temple is just a morally reprehensible human being who is contributing to this greater influence of white supremacy, I'm not kidding. So another example that I want to give is David Griffin, who runs a branch of the ceremonial magic, is vocally, virulently anti-Islamic, as well as a bunch of other horrible things. And he likes to stalk and harass and bully people into silence when they bring up examples of his really clear white supremacy in his online comments. Or we can talk about the New Age to alt-right pipeline, or the crunchy to alt-right pipeline, which starts off in a very gender essentialist, very culturally appropriative place, and just slides into Nazism. I actually eventually want to film an entire video on the New Age to alt-right pipeline, and how prevalent it is, and how to hopefully catch yourself if you're on it. And I say this as someone who is in the process of growing a lot of my own food in organic garden in my backyard, and making a bunch of stuff for myself and learning how to do all these things. So I end up following all these people on social media, trying to learn from them. And I'll think that I found someone who's sharing all this great content and it's so wonderful. And then I'm like, wow, that was a little white supremacist. Oh, that was a lot white supremacist. Oh, nope, gotta block you. Happens to me all the time. Used to follow someone, anyway. So I do need to film a video about that eventually. But I belabor my points as always, and I digress as always. I think I've beaten this horse and I should move on. The reason why so many people feel unwelcome in these spaces is because they are unwelcome in many spaces. Finding a safe space right now is really, really, really hard. And we have to dig in and fight back, recognize the strategies that are being used to take safe spaces away from us, and fight for them. So if y'all want a video either from me or Yun talking about infiltration strategies that are used by white supremacists to take over communities, let us know. We'd be happy to film one. If you want more historical examples of how white supremacy has influenced the occult, esoteric, pagan, neo-pagan, reconstructionist, witchcraft, etc. communities, let us know. We'd be happy to film that. But I wanted to keep this relatively short. You're not alone in what you're feeling. It's absolutely happening to more than just you. And it is a very real problem. It is very prevalent, and we all do need to fight back against it in order to have spaces where it's safe for us to learn from each other. All right. Thank you all. Please remember to like, subscribe, comment support for our channel, because we've been getting some interesting hateful comments, which I'm trying to delete. Please send us your questions for Ask a Witch and other content that you'd like to see. Be safe, everyone.